Paul here, doing a quick Q&A, which I've been promising a while, those in the chat who post questions in the areas of human courtship, love, dating, relationships, masculine, feminine instincts, understanding men, understanding women, and understanding narcissism and its opposite, character virtue, and just about anything in psychology that you might like to ask, that we could discuss, have an educational discussion. There were a couple gentlemen recently in the chat who responded to my invite to just pose questions for these kinds of Q&As. I should have thought of doing this a long time ago. This should be good, though. There's one gentleman that has a question about how do I set up my home in a way that's going to benefit me in, I think, in finding love and dating. So I might as well answer that gentleman first. It should be, pretty simple. Then there's another gentleman that asks a lot of early dating courtship questions, or, tells stories about things he has encountered. And again, I only have a brief time this time around, but I've been promising you for quite a while to respond and do one of these. Okay. So let's see. This gentleman says, Dr. Paul, I've got a really important question for you. He liked an article, actually an animated video on the importance of discipline in a man's life. Okay. So beginning with that, he says, my question is, how do I set up my home to be most appropriate for dating and for me to do the best I can do in dating, in finding love, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. So initial thoughts on that. You reminded me of something I learned early in psychoanalysis training, when they were talking about a lot about dreams and what do dreams mean. And there are a lot of books written about this where every aspect of a dream is interpreted to mean a certain psychological feature and so forth. But it struck me what they actually said is dreams are just an entree to the unconscious, to Freud, and they don't necessarily represent objects and characters and people in your dreams. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's the brain trying to work out traumas and the artifacts of the day. So it's not like logical storytelling when we're talking about dreams. But what struck me is they said when you dream of a house, like you're wandering around a house and there are maybe people in it, characters, objects, none of that means anything except it's representative of you. You dream of a house, the house is you. And that's what I was reminded of. That's from 35, 40 years ago, in my training, is what you made me think of when you were talking about how do I set up my house. So I think it would be, useful to say the way you set your house up not only should be representative of you, but if you just went with your gut, it would be representative of you. So if you set it up all messy, then perhaps there's like a messy cloud above your head and you're not sure what your goals are or what you want to do. And then the house itself is kind of in chaos. So you could consider the way you would naturally set up your house might reveal clues to you about aspects of you that are true to your personality and your sense of self and identity. But then again, it might reveal to you areas for you to work on, to, again, get more disciplined about, the old advice, make your bed. That's how to start your day. Make your bed neat and try making your house neat and see if that has a ripple effect onto your psychology and getting yourself to change the way you think to become a more disciplined person. I think I told you also in the notes that there were some feng shui kinds of aspects that I have heard of that make sense to me. They feel right. Like you never leave the head of your bed be against a window. And it's kind of like all of your thoughts and valuable ponderings go out the window and it drives you crazy or something, according to feng shui. So the head of your bed should be against a wall, not a window. Yeah, and it also struck me, I wondered why he was so concerned about the nature of home and setting up a house or apartment as opposed to learning about what you like in a potential mate and how to screen for that. So I wondered what maybe you can write me back what the specific connection is to the importance of setting up your house right, why that's top of mind for you as opposed to learning about love itself and figuring out what you like in another person. Also, just generally, I've noticed on the bell curve, males tend to not care as much about the decoration of a home as much as its function, its utility for you to go out into the world. I think of like ancient hunter gatherer tribes and so forth, evolutionary psychology, where the males were all about going out into the hunting grounds to get meat for the village or to wage war against other tribes. They may not have cared how messy their house is so long as they know where all the tools and weapons are in the chaos. I've experienced that. Let's jump to the gentleman who's had lots and lots of courtship questions really for years now, and hopefully not to hurt his feelings, but they tend to be so long, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around what is the summation of what this person is asking. There's so much detail in them. So I'll read one of the most recent ones he writes, and I'll try to interpret what he's meaning, what he's asking. During the courtship process, he says, I'm reluctant to define the relationship. I found once I did, example, will you be my girlfriend? Her attitude shifts and she wants to domesticate me. That's a pretty strong word. I mean, makes me wonder about what kinds of people you're meeting. Deep down, I know I just handed my power over to her, my power to be independent and a challenge. I am loyal to one girl, but by not defining the relationship, I maintain my mystery and I can lead with my Hermes instinct. And I'll have to explain to you what he means by that. He knows my models and processes of human courtship in detail, but you can get lost in the details sometimes. Having juvenile fun, bouncing to different places and banter. So what he means by the Hermes instinct, it's a nomenclature I use to name all the masculine and feminine instincts that we know exist. And you've heard me talk a lot about how exciting it is to me that there are finally researchers that are legitimizing or uncovering and, quote, proving the existence of so far three masculine instincts. An instinct to be provider protector, gave that the name the Zeus about 20 years ago. Zeus is the chief god of Mount Olympus. The second is the instinct to fight to win. In other words, strive for goals and success, winning. I call that the Ares instinct because Ares was the god of war, of competition and trying to win. And then thirdly, the third proven, not discovered, but uncovered masculine instinct is the instinct to not reveal one's emotions publicly, which you could say is stoicism. There's been some writing. A friend of mine wrote a recent great article about stoicism as a therapy or a precursor to therapies. The, the stoicism instinct, I give the name Hades, which is the male god of the underworld. The underworld always represents the unconscious and your privacy, your workshop of the mind, if you will, the cave that, Bruce Lee or Steven Seagal or Jason Statham or any modern action hero has to retreat to, the belly of the whale, retreat to heal and to strategize what their next move towards success is going to be. So going interior into yourself, not blabbering all your emotions out, to the world, wearing your heart on your sleeve. It would be the opposite of this Hades instinct, as I call it. So what is the Hermes instinct? What does that mean? That's the male instinct for communication. It would be used in a man in sales who works in sales, for example, talking rapidly and convincingly. It's like a public speaking instinct. It contains humor, most likely. And you could say it's characterized by mysteriousness, a kind of intrigue. So it's a way of entertaining others, capturing their interest, enjoying. Hermes was the trickster as well. In Roman terms was Mercury, right? The liquid metal that's mysterious and hard to grasp. The quick talking, fast talking, humorous guy that you don't know exactly what his point is or what he's all about, but he's captured your interest and he's entertaining and enjoyable to be around. That's what he's referring to. I believe it to be the very first masculine instinct expressed in the human courtship process. Once females show up to a social venue, and then there are suitors who have interest, and this is the first thing they do is open communication in a fun, playful, tricksterish, humorous way. So he's talking about concern over moving too quickly from light-hearted humor, and the stakes are low in early dating, because who knows if you'll have a second date or a third date? You may not. The stakes are low. There's no investment yet by either of you. And he worries about going from that playful, enjoyable first date kind of lifestyle to moving toward a little more preference for each other and commitment to each other. But he uses this term domesticate, which automatically tells me he must have encountered some pretty narcissistic dates and girlfriends at some point, because somebody who is an empath and essentially what amounts to a high character, good person is not going to be hell bent on controlling you, which is what I think you mean by domesticate, which then leads him into a discussion of what I call the Hera instinct and the Zeus instinct, which are two recent mini lectures that I did to introduce a series on how I have come to understand the masculine and feminine instincts through these ancient Greek dramas and myths and stories. They just flesh out the details, the universal details in the average male throughout history and throughout all cultures, and the average female in the middle of the bell curve, and explain how these instincts work, these unconscious, automatic, inherited, evolutionarily determined principles called instincts. So the Hera and the Zeus, he says, what do you think about the Hera instinct role and the Zeus instinct role? Does Hera domesticate Zeus? No, I don't think Hera controls Zeus. They were always in conflict in the stories, the dramatic stories. Zeus always had his tendency toward having a wandering eye for other females, which does speak to an evolutionary principle you may have encountered in the writings of Jeffrey Miller, The Mating Mind, any of the popular evolutionary psychology authors to the 2000s. You'll see this in that. The theory is that because males have billions of gametes over the lifetime, evolutionarily as a mating strategy, encoded automatically in instinctual behavior as a mating strategy, males have tended to have a wandering eye, spread the seed widely because there are many, many gametes, which is evolutionarily successful in promoting ongoing gene line for that line, that male's family line, whereas females have 200 to 300 total viable eggs over the lifetime, very few by comparison. So their mating strategy, which is instinctual and automatic and unconscious, tends to be very cautious and careful in selection of the right male. So there's one strategy built into Zeus and seen in the Greek dramas, and there's the other strategy, which is the careful, critical, exacting standards in the female that you see in Hera, being very critical of her husband as he is kind of, you know, you know, profligate in his use of his wandering eye, looking at and sleeping with other females, gods and mortals. So they have this ongoing tension between them, but they are married. So Hermes is the first male instinct used in human courtship, and I call it step one. But then in step two, it's where a male and female start to show preference for each other over all others. And that's risky. And I think that's what this gentleman is speaking to, is the risk of being recognized as preferring her over all other females, or at least other females in the vicinity. And her response, if courtship is going to continue, will be to select you and prefer you. And the Hera and the Zeus being husband and wife, but also mother and father to all the other Olympians, all the other deities. They're the twin parenthood of the others. Also makes sense at step two, because step two, where we become not just casual dating, but boyfriend girlfriend potential, that's where couples tend to start to use cute terms for each other, like baby, like calling each other baby. Does it really mean you think the other person is immature and a baby? Or is it a term of endearment where you're expressing preference for that person? Well, that's where in the male, the fatherly tendency comes out in this Zeus instinct, expressed to the female that he wants to care for her, provide for her, and starts to feel tender feelings that might be reminiscent of what it was like for a girl to feel preferred by her father, protected by her father. It's not that they are in a disjointed mismatch of maturity at this point. They are peers, but still the instinct to father, protect and care for and show preference for comes out in the male, and the same for the female. That's the Hera instinct. That's what it should be doing if the person isn't very, very narcissistic. It ought to be generous, empathic, and kind, and honest and authentic in saying, I really prefer you over anyone else around, anyone else available to me. You are my preference. And I'm starting to feel tender feelings for you. I'm being the female that a mother might feel toward a son, a preference for the son over all other boys who are not hers. That kind of calling each other baby and preferring. And in her case, wanting to nurture and to cheer on, to not encourage, but to applaud and cheer on. I don't want to say the word cheerleader, but that's kind of where that concept has always come from. It's this Hera instinct. Anyway, this person is Phil. And so, Phil, my summary of all this, it's easy to get lost in these granular details. And I have seen them prove true over and over again, helping people like in vivo out on the town socially to see behaviors and decode them and what they mean and learn how to be your authentic self and find somebody right for you, almost like learning how to matchmake yourself. But instead of getting lost in those details, I'm going to write an article soon about this. If I wanted to just summarize the easiest way to get started in selecting the right mate for you, where things will go well and could go for life, I think that is what we are made for, even though it's hard to try to reach. I think we're made for monogamy eventually, not serial monogamy, but monogamy with exactly the right person. Then the best starting point would be start with somebody that you have relative certainty is not highly narcissistic or Machiavellian. And it occurred to me there are plenty of valid, proven online surveys, self surveys, or they could be administered to others, or you could even answer the questions from what you have learned about this other person you're dating. Answer it as if you're them and see what kind of results you get on a narcissism survey. I think it's the NP16. I'm going to post this soon online. You can go there and just answer the questions according to what you know of the person. And then secondly, get their mock score on a Machiavellian trait test, also available online and valid. And you could answer it as if you're them, or I don't know if you would want to ask them to take it. They'd get quickly suspicious. What are you testing me for here? But get some measure of, don't get started in the first place with a very narcissistic person who's going to, quote, domesticate you at some point, rather than just love you with the kind of tenderness that a mother once loved you with, hopefully. In your youth, it ought to be reminiscent of that. It ought to feel comfortable, safe, secure, and You ought to feel honored and chosen by the woman rather than, quote, domesticated and controlled. That would come from narcissism and Machiavellianism. So why not screen for that at the get go? And then from there, if you study methods like Gottman method for couples, there are valid, thorough, fleshed out models of a stable, lasting marriage. Gottman has a lockdown on that. So almost anyone you pick, or even picking the wrong personality style in the other person, could